I should say that this emerges from long-standing thought on intention. One can always think more. I think there are unexplored aspects of the topic. There are certainly insufficiently explored aspects of the topic. And here I'm motivated in part by a rather large project in ethics, framing what I call an ethics of conduct, a notion I characterize three-dimensionally, and I will introduce the notion shortly. I'd like to begin, though, with some background on the territory. Part one is on forms of intention. The most common form I call infinitival, and it's simply intending to, where what follows the to specifies an action or activity. We could spend a lot of time distinguishing actions from activities, but the distinction isn't sharp, and nothing turns on how one makes it, as far as I can see. Nothing in this presentation. There's also intending to be, say, to be a better citizen, and that is much harder to understand, but some of the things I say will bear on how we should explicate it. Now, less common than intending to is objectual intending. You can intend an object for a purpose, intend a carving knife for a special occasion. There clearly are intentions to do connected with this, but the exact actions that go with realization of an objectual intention don't have to be foreseen in the formation of that intention. Now, another category, not so widely known, is the subjunctive category. You can intend that your students understand utilitarianism, which is often mischaracterized as the view that right acts are those that promote the greatest good for the greatest number. What do you have to intend to do to have a subjunctive intention? Well, it's not clear to me that you have to intend to do anything in particular, but you would have to have in mind a range of things that might be appropriate to bringing about the state of affairs. Now, you might ask whether there's a basic form here and whether some of the cases are reducible, say, to intending to do. Intending is a practical attitude, and intending to do seems to have a certain kind of primacy. I'm inclined to think that there is not straightforward reducibility, but I do think we might say something else, that intentions that, for example, supervene on intentions to do and dispositions to form intentions to do. That comes to saying something like this: if two people are exactly alike in their intentions to do and their dispositions to intend to do, then they won't differ in their intentions that their students understand utilitarianism, for instance. So I'm looking at a number of cases, and I'm going to make use of the subjunctive as well as of the infinitive case in what follows. Let me then go to part two. I assume I'm quite audible in the back of the room. Is anyone having any difficulty? Thank you. Here, I talk about sources of intention, and I have in mind the kinds of sources that are philosophically identifiable as opposed to the kinds that you might discover only if you did empirical research in psychology. So one obvious source is volitional, and here decision is a paradigm. I think that deciding to A entails intending to A, and resolutions, when they're serious and not mere New Year's resolutions, seem to entail intending. But there are subtleties here. I simply want to call attention to the common volitional root to intention formation. Now, there are also doxastic roots, that is, roots that come from belief formation or some essential connection to belief. So imagine this. You want to go to a certain play, but you think tickets are unavailable, so you don't form an intention to go to the play. When you discover, and thereby believe, that a friend has a spare ticket, you form the intention to go to the play. So the motivational background is there. The belief formation is the generative trigger, one might say. Now, habit is another source, and this is a very complicated matter. There are many cases. You might have a standing intention to ask new graduate students where they did their undergraduate work. Given that, when you meet a new graduate student, you might, as a matter of habit, ask, where did you do your undergraduate work, by the way? But there are other cases that don't involve necessarily a prior intention. You might actually, by practice, repeated practice that you haven't particularly tracked, put on the left shoe before the right shoe in the morning. And so, although it's true that you intend that shoe for that foot, there are many forms the intention can take specifically, this isn't a case where habit has emerged through exercise of a previously held intention. Now, I've already talked about triggers. Some triggers are external in the way an onrushing car is. So if you look up and there's a car rushing towards you, you quickly step out of the way. There is something like the automaticity of reflex behavior, but here you're acting in order to save your life. So we have intentional action of a spontaneous and rather automatic kind. Now, another case, less noticed, I think, comes with motivational change. Perhaps you would like to go to the theater, but the play you want to see is on at the same time as a symphony you want to hear. You can't quite make up your mind. In the morning, somehow you find that you intend to go to the play. What has happened? There's been a shift in your motivation. Now, there could be a conversation that leads to the shift. You might notice the shift, you might not. But the point is, when in certain circumstances motivation becomes predominant in a certain way, we can have intention formation that is not a result of decision or these other kinds of things. Okay, I've been locating intention in various sources and talking about forms that it commonly takes. In part 3, I'm going to talk about the range of its objects. What sort of thing follows the to, for instance, in intending to sing a song? Well, singing a song is an activity. Raising a hand is just an action we wouldn't call an activity. And I'm inclined to think that the objects here should be considered types, not tokens. So although this token realizes my intention to raise a hand, another token would have realized the same intention because the intention has an abstract kind of thing as its content. We can also speak of its object. Now, act hierarchies can be objects of intention as well, and so you can intend to do something which has a first step and a second step, and one step is accomplished by finishing a previous step. Moreover, arguably, action itself is structurally hierarchical. If we do anything at all, then at the time we do something basically, in the sense that we don't do it by doing something else. So in giving this illustration, I just raise my hand. I don't do that by doing anything else. I give the illustration by raising the hand. Now, it is by virtue of the movement of muscles that I raise my hand, but I don't move the muscles actionally. Rather, the only way I know how to move the muscles is by doing the thing, the doing of which involves the movement of those muscles. So the moving of the muscles is a doing, but it is not, in my case anyway, an action. Now, we also have various modifications of acts, and this is important in understanding what I call conduct. What you do, you normally do in a certain way. And sometimes the way you do it is deliberate and important, sometimes it's not. We can also talk not just of acts modified by an adverb of manner, but of mannered action. Yelling is speaking in a certain loud way. So we can talk about yelling as an act type, but notice that it's not a simple act type because there is the basic act for most people of speaking, and then there is the volume, which is a separate variable. So I'm going to take an interest in the adverbial dimension of action, which goes with the idea of doing things in a particular way. Now, we can also describe acts purposively. So if you ask me why on earth I, who hate painting, am painting a garage, I can say, I'm keeping a promise. So I've described in terms of a commitment the thing I'm doing, so you know why I'm doing it, and it isn't then so puzzling. Now, I can say also, I intend to do it because I promised to, and that is actually ambiguous if you put pressure on it. It can mean, because I promised to, I intend to do it, or, with some perversity perhaps, it can mean, I intend, to do it because I promised to. Now, if it means the second, there's a real problem understanding how to make it out. And my suggestion is that we not take the clause that specifies a reason for action to specify the content of an intention. So if you ask, what did S do? S is our agent. The answer might be, S helped an elderly lady load her groceries in her car, which is in a parking lot. Why did S do it? Well, S was hoping to distract her so as to make off with her purse, her handbag. Now, is there an act of, hyphenated now, helping the lady load her groceries for the reason that one wants to distract her and take her purse? I don't think that is a content of intention. It's true that when you know the motive, you can describe the action in terms of the motive. So we might say, he's a nasty fellow. What is he really doing? We don't believe that he's being beneficent, helping with the groceries. And then the answer might be, well, what he's really doing is setting her up to steal her purse. But notice, the specification of purpose tells me why the act I could see is being done. It still doesn't give me a content of intention that has the form to A for R, where A is the act type and R is the reason. Now, I suggest that a strategy here for seeing the point could be called erotetic evaluation or individuation. Erotetic logic is the logic of questions. Questions are very important in understanding concepts. So what I would say is the question, what did S do, is answered by specifying the act type. The question, why did S do it, is answered by specifying some motivational variable. And these are two different questions. And one way to see how different they are is to imagine that someone is giving evidence at a trial and a lawyer says, wait a minute, you said that the accused loaded the groceries in order to get ready for the theft. The question is what was done, not why. It's for the jury to decide why. So here getting the description of the action is quite importantly distinct from getting a description of the complex state of affairs, doing a thing for a particular reason. Now, you can also see something unfold here that goes with the notion of conduct. I've said that I'm working out a theory of conduct as an important moral focus, and I have coming out any time now from OUP a book called Means, Ends, and Persons, in which I say a good deal about what constitutes conduct and why that's important. I'll say a little more today, but notice that you can say of our confidence trickster, his conduct was shameful, even if the husband arrived in time and he was never able to pull off the theft. What's shameful about it is the overall behavioral pattern doing a thing for an ignoble reason. That doesn't make doing the thing for a reason an act type, but conduct is three-dimensional, and it covers the what, the act type, the why, the motivational variable, and the how, the variable of manner. One more illustration. Imagine that the boss, upon leaving the office, says to an intern who is working late, "Put out the lights before you leave." Well, that's rather harshly said, isn't it? Now, I want to say the boss is properly saving power. It might even be a duty. The boss is motivated by the desire to save power, but the conduct is reprehensible because the deed is done in the wrong way. This is a new intern who is going to be hurt. Perhaps the person was going to turn off the lights anyway, but you would think the boss, let us suppose there was an annoying phone call, is angry with the intern when actually it's just one of those things. The boss is in a hurry and does the right thing for a good reason, but in the wrong way. So the conduct is reprehensible on account of the variable of manner, not on account of the variable of motive or act type. So conduct is three-dimensional, and three-dimensional conduct is very important morally. That brings me to part 4, which is entitled The Itinerary Conception of Intention. Notice that you can ask someone, "What are you going to do?" meaning roughly, what do you intend to do? What you intend is, in a sense, where you're going. This makes it very natural to suppose that intentions put prospective deeds on your itinerary. Now, you can't talk about an itinerary if there's nothing that serves as a sort of map. So what I'm doing is to suggest a useful metaphor that fits well with the cartographic idea that the belief system is a map for each of us of reality. So your itinerary indicates a sort of expected destination relative to your map. And because your intentions determine your itinerary, they're very important in helping us see where you're going. So your governing, settled, basic intentions say a lot about you. They are connected, of course, with the will. Arguably, the will, in Kant say, is a construct out of intentions, if you're thinking of the will in a very broad way, dispositionally, and not in terms of volitions. So the metaphor calls attention to the importance of intention in our planning, in our character, in our evaluation of persons. Desire does not put something on your itinerary. We all have desires that are outweighed by other desires, and they don't predominate in the way in which a motivational condition predominates when it yields intention. Hopes involve desire, but they're a step further from intention than desire that is combined with some sort of expectation too strong to allow us to attribute a hope. Now, I'm going to skip just a little bit and say just a word about the implications of the itinerary conception for the belief, desire, account of intention. I particularly want to say that because I published an article in the Journal of Philosophy long ago, which has over the years been battered and has been regarded as providing a reductive account in terms of beliefs and desires of intending. It was not intended as a reductive account, but as an explication. But I do think there's much to be said for the idea that, above all, intending is a matter of an appropriate combination of a predominant desire, one that's not outweighed by any competing set of desires, and a performance expectation. So you have the motivation together with the envisaged destination and the expectation of getting there, and that is why you're going there, and the act belongs on your itinerary. All right. Now, once we get this far, we can see more about the content of intention. In the literature of cognitive psychology, there's a good deal on scripts. So I haven't read the recent work on this, but the basic idea is that we human beings, efficient creatures that we are, often have a pattern that we will realize in order to save us going through every step individually. So you might have a script for a party invitation, and as you call the third person, your intention is just to invite that person, but the content is given by a script which leads you to go through a series of steps, and there can be conditional intentions involved here as well. If she says, "Can I bring the children?" one asks how old they are and whether they're okay on their own and what time they'd have to go home, that sort of thing. Now, it can be more complicated than that. I know a certain short Chopin prelude quite well. If I intend to play it, I just sit down and play it. And if everything goes well, I don't think about it in terms of, a C minor chord at all. Now, if something went wrong and you said, "Did you intend to hit a D flat?" I might say no. But of course, I mean that wasn't on the script or something of the sort. I don't mean I had an intention to miss the D flat. It's not as though I had a tendency to hit the D flat when I shouldn't, and I didn't suppress the tendency. That's a different case. All right. Now I'm ready to talk more about the problem of intended conduct. If we're going to do justice to the breadth of the kinds of objects of intention, and we're going to develop a theory of conduct which we need for a full account of moral responsibility, we have to do justice to the idea that you can intend, for instance, to treat persons as ends, going to Kant's humanity formula. And indeed, it's tempting to say, I'm inclined to say, what's commandable is intendable. And so, if you are commanded, or so you think, to love your neighbor as yourself, you can presumably intend to love your neighbor as yourself. But love isn't even an action. And so understanding that commandment is extremely complex if we're trying to move from love thy neighbor as thyself to a content of intention so that we can understand accepting the command in the form of adopting a serious intention. So what exactly are we to say? Now, just by way of background, I don't want to get into Kantian ethics too much, but I do want to say that Kant surely had in mind something that is explicated only in terms of a behavioral type as complex as conduct. You don't treat a person as an end if you do the right thing, even for the right reason, but you do it in a dramatically wrong way. And of course, you know from reading Kant that if you do the right thing for an inappropriate reason, you haven't treated the person involved as an end, at least if the inappropriate reason is instrumental in the wrong way, as where our con man is treating the woman as a means to making a quick buck, making the money that he hopes to get. So treatment is a case of conduct. Now, how are we going to understand the content of intention in these cases? And by the way, if you promise to love an adopted child, as you might, again, we have to understand that the content of a promise will involve the content of the intention that you form if you properly promise. So I am seeking to understand how we should interpret the humanity formula and any number of other complex injunctions that involve intention formation, where the object that's immediately before us in describing the intention is not an act type. So treatment is a conduct type, it is not an act type. It's not an act type because we've got motive and manner built in. We don't just have the doing type built in. Now, you might ask yourself whether Kant tried to solve the problem by positing intentions to act on maxims. If you look at his famous 4 examples in the groundwork, one of them seems to involve the idea that you can have as a maxim, from love I will, from self-love I will dispatch my life if it promises more suffering than pleasure, for instance. I don't really think that's a good reading of Kant, and if you look at the maxims for the other 3 cases in that same part of the groundwork, you aren't tempted the way you might be before hearing this paper, of course, to attribute to Kant the idea that intentions can have the form to A for R. I think Kant was quite clear that what you do is one thing and doing it with moral worth is another, and the latter, he thought, is a matter of why you do it, which has to do with the sense of duty, the motive of duty, and so forth. So, what I'm going to do in part 3 here is suggest 3 ways of understanding such intentions as the intention to treat persons as ends, the intention to love one's neighbor as oneself. You can intend to bring it about that you, as a matter of practice, treat people as ends. Now, what is bringing about? It's clearly higher order, but it's the sort of thing that unfolds, as you think about it, somewhat the way a script unfolds, although intending to bring about does not entail having a script. You can intend to bring something about in a very optimistic way that does not involve at all being precise about how you're going to bring about the desired end. So if I intend to bring it about that I treat people as ends, I have in mind a series of things I might do and a sense that there are many more that I might do. So I call that, a kind of higher order view, the umbrella view. But we could also have a sort of altruistic pattern view where I've been thinking about the sorts of deeds I need to perform in order to treat persons as ends. Now, I also have a sense of why I would do those things, but if you want to form the intention at all to treat persons as ends, you probably have any number of beneficent motives, and so you're expecting the right motives to be there in the first place. So you may not even be tempted to do something to attach the deeds that you have to perform to the right motivation. You might have that temptation, to be sure. If there's somebody I want to treat as an end, but I know that there's a great deal to be gained pragmatically by treating that person well, I may want to unharness the self-interested motive from the altruistic motive, and I may make special efforts to do that. Kant did not think we can do that. I do not think we can do it at will. It's very hard to see how you can unharness the wrong motive when you have 2 motives aligned toward an action, and you like to act for one of them, the admirable one, and not for the other, the self-interested one. So Kant was very pessimistic about how much self-control we have here, and it's a major question of moral psychology, just what self-control we can hope to develop. However, certainly intending to treat persons as ends, to internalize and adopt the Kantian humanity formula, can involve an intention that has a very complex conjunction in its content. Notice, though, a conjunctive intention could have determinate content regarding particular deeds, but also the intention to bring about a continuing and improving pattern of doing good things for people in the right way. Now, there's something else that doesn't force us to choose between these two interpretations, the umbrella interpretation and the conjunctive interpretation, can be coupled with both. It's the subjunctive route that I mentioned earlier. I can intend that I treat people as ends in the future. This is, of course, related to intending to be a more altruistic or a morally better person. So intention to be comes in here, as well as intention that, whose content is given by a subjunctive. So if I intend that I treat persons as ends, henceforth, I can have a lot of things in mind, and I can be disposed to form any number of intentions, but I don't have to have a determinate list of deeds. And probably if the list is determinate, it'll be too short to do justice to what I ought to be envisaging if I intend that I treat people as ends henceforth. So, as I see it, we have to have a theory that enables us to do justice to the practicality, the action directedness of intention as a practical attitude, and yet we must do justice to the complexity of the content intentions can have, and I think must have, if it's true that what's commandable is intendable. Now, there is, of course, fluidity as well as combinability among these various kinds of content of intention. So you can start out with an intention that, and then think about how you're going to realize the state of affairs, such as becoming a better citizen, treating persons as ends. As you think about the state of affairs, you can form specific intentions to do specific things. If, moreover, you are tempted to do some of these things for the wrong reason, so that you wouldn't be treating the person involved as an end, you can think about how indirectly you can influence your motivation. That is a tall order, and I won't go into that aspect of moral psychology now, but I think all of us know that with good self-understanding, there's quite a bit we can do to try to detach the wrong kind of motivation from deeds that we're committed to, that we're tempted to perform for the wrong reason. Now let me go to part 6, which is my concluding part. I said I would try to give us plenty of time for discussion, and I'm going to try to live up to that. This is on responsibility for action, intention formation, and conduct. Now let's talk about lying promises for a moment. Well, if you know you're tempted to make a lying promise, you can abstain. Making a lying promise, as Kant saw, can be a way of treating a person merely as a means, and certainly is typically a way of failing to treat a person as an end. So here, I would say we have a case where abstaining from forming a certain intention is important. And if you do the deed without forming the intention, I think we can even talk about an obligation to form the intention. So, if I find out that you've made a promise, and I know you well, and I know you don't intend to perform, I can say, you really should do it, you know, and I see you don't intend to. Now look, if you think about how much she needs your help, maybe the intention will grow. Remember what she did for you. There are all sorts of things I can do. The better I know you, the more I can do what needs to be done. And of course, we should know ourselves well, so some of us know pretty well what to do if we've gotten into a situation where we don't have an intention we know we ought to have. Now, I also think, interestingly, that the notion of incontinence, weakness of will in other terminology, applies to intention. A simple case would be this. You have resolved that you've had quite enough to drink, given that you need to drive. But as the waiter comes toward you and the champagne smells ever so good, you reach out for a glass of it, so you've not only formed the intention but started acting, or you maybe just formed the intention and you haven't yet reached out. But as luck would have it, the waiter drops the tray just before you can reach out for the glass, so you have formed an intention you shouldn't have formed. You've suffered a kind of interior weakness of will. So clearly, intention formation, at least at the level of its abstention, negatively speaking, can be under voluntary control, arguably sometimes direct voluntary control, meaning you control it without controlling it by doing something else. That's a separate matter. Maybe the control never is direct. I've already covered the point that when it comes to conduct, we have a certain negative control because we can abstain from the relevant action. So let me just give you a little more terminology. Conduct is three-dimensional. You have an act type, a motive, and a manner of performance when the conduct is actually realized. Well, the act type represents the vehicle of the conduct. No act type, no conduct. Well, you can abstain from doing a thing if you think you would be doing it in a way that treats someone merely as a means. So suppose you've got an employee whom you've sent on a dangerous mission, and you realize while things are in progress that you're treating this person merely as a means and you haven't spent money on some safety precautions. Well, you can immediately get on the telephone and right yourself, having the employee cease until safety measures are instituted, or you can just call off whatever it is. So you can change conduct in midstream, you can abstain from starting something you think you'd be doing for the wrong reason. Again, moral responsibility, in my view, has very wide scope. So I think then that we find variability as to what moral responsibility applies to. It applies not just to act types, but to intentions. It applies to manner of performance. It's highly variable from one individual to another, and as you can imagine, given the complexity of conduct, moral luck comes in. So it's a kind of moral luck that you don't do certain terrible things you might have done if circumstances hadn't intervened. And maybe all of us have a certain moral luck if we're born in circumstances in which moral education is effective. There are many, many more dimensions of all this, and I think what I should do now is just read you a little bit of my conclusion so things are rounded out a little more. Intentions have much more diverse content than is generally recognized. They may be not only to do, but also to be, and that something be the case. They may also be toward ordinary objects not specifiable in an infinitive or propositional clause at all. You might intend an object for a task. These major roles of intention are among the grounds for its moral importance. But it's also morally important as essential in making sincere promises and in carrying out directives. Both are promises and such important injunctions as Kant's categorical imperative and the commandment to love our neighbors as ourselves are properly accepted only if the addressee forms some appropriate intention. Indeed, at least one intention that captures the sort of conduct describable as treating persons as ends. The problem that emerges on analysis, which I've been working with, is that the kind of treatment central in the humanity formula, the injunction to treat persons as ends and never merely as means, The love commandments and promises to love is not an act type, but more complex, a kind of conduct. One of its dimensions is motivational, and this presents a problem given that we do not have direct voluntary control of our motivation, nor is either desiring something or acting on a reason the kind of thing that is an object of intention. We saw, I think, that it is only by appeal to umbrella intentions, conjunctive intentions, or subjunctive intentions that we can make good sense of the intention to achieve the morally required conduct, to treat persons as ends, for example. I've described the sorts of elements that constitute the content of such intentions. Those intentions are highly diverse, and their cultivation and maintenance requires not only determining what actions to perform, but also monitoring oneself and performing many kinds of acts aimed at eliciting appropriate motivation, reinforcing certain habits, resisting certain temptations, and controlling the manner of one's actions. The scope of our moral responsibility is thus very wide and extends to internal as well as external behavior. Even in the realm of thinking and planning, there is not only what we do, but why we do it and how we do it. Responsibility for conduct reaches the domain of thought, including intention and even emotion, as well as the realm of overt action. Socrates famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. He might perhaps equally well have said that the unexamined self is not worth praising.
Thank you.